The Exarchoth fleet descended upon Earth like a storm breaking through the clouds, massive ships carving a path through space. With sheer force of will, their arrival was marked by a silence so profound it felt as though the universe itself held its breath. Earth's first warning came when the skies above New York City rippled and split open. Strange shapes began to appear as massive ships phased into view, their surfaces shimmering and shifting in a way that defied comprehension. The world stood still for a moment as millions watched in disbelief across every continent. The fleet's arrival was broadcast live with no need for translation. Their message was simple and direct: surrender or perish. From the moment the first salvo of energy blasts cracked through Earth's defenses, the world realized the threat they faced. No weapon on the planet was powerful enough to stop them. Human forces scrambled to mount an answer. They launched everything they had: missiles, jets, and drones barely scratched the surface of the invaders' armor. The alien ships seemed impervious to anything humanity threw at them. Entire cities were reduced to rubble in seconds. The Earth trembled under the weight of their assault. And yet, despite the overwhelming force, the Exarchoth did not feel threatened. They believed they were witnessing a brief moment of resistance from an inferior species. They had seen it countless times before across the galaxy, species that put up a fight only to crumble beneath the weight of their power. But the humans were different. They fought not like machines or coordinated armies, but like an unyielding tide of chaos. There was no pattern, no structure, just an instinctive drive to survive. Their movements were unpredictable and uncoordinated. Each strike seemed to come from a different place, a different angle, and every time the aliens thought they had crushed the resistance, another group of humans rose up somewhere else. In the middle of the chaos stood Commander Xerox, a towering figure of intellect and strength among his people. He was a master strategist, with thousands of years of experience in warfare and conquest. Yet as he watched Earth's forces rally against his ships, he could not deny the growing sense of unease. He was used to enemies that crumbled quickly in the face of superior firepower. But these humans were different. Their persistence was maddening. They did not break, they did not fear, they only fought back with a strength that made no sense to him. He had never encountered a species like this before, a species whose survival instincts seemed so deeply ingrained in their very nature. He ordered a full-scale assault on the human strongholds across the globe. Their tactics were flawless, calculated, and precise. Entire cities were decimated in mere moments as the Exarchoth struck down humanity's last defenses. But even as the humans were pushed to the brink, they fought, they screamed, they rallied their forces, and somehow found a way to survive. Where other species had failed, humanity seemed to thrive in the face of impossible odds. Their strategy was simple and primal, but it worked. They refused to die. And in that refusal, Xerox began to see something that unnerved him, something that could not be accounted for, a dangerous spark of potential that he could not ignore. As the battle raged on across the planet, the commander found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about warfare and about this strange, fragile species called humans. The first real signs of trouble for the Exarchoth came when their ships began to experience strange malfunctions. They hadn't expected any sort of resistance to their superior technology. But now their once flawless systems were riddled with inconsistencies. Weapon systems failed to fire when they should have, and shields flickered unpredictably. The enemy had no access to the same technology, yet somehow their attacks were having an effect. Xerox's eyes narrowed as he watched a live feed of one of his ships under assault by human forces. A small group of fighters had somehow slipped past the perimeter of his fleet, dodging every scan and detection system that Exarchoth had in place. They were nowhere near as fast or as powerful as his own forces, but they moved like shadows across the sky, and with incredible accuracy they delivered blows that caused the ship's hull to crack and warp in ways that defied logic. How had these primitive creatures managed this? Was it sheer luck, or was something more troubling happening? Xerox ordered an immediate counterattack, sending a squadron of his most advanced fighters to deal with the humans who dared challenge them. The alien vessels moved in perfect formation with deadly precision, yet the humans once again outmaneuvered them. somehow dodging and weaving through a hailstorm of fire, as though they were reading the battlefield in real time. The Exarchoth couldn't predict where the humans would strike next. They were everywhere, all at once and nowhere. At all, the human forces fought not with the power of their ships, but with their wits. Their strategies were unpredictable, illogical, chaotic, even, but that was exactly what made them so dangerous. The humans didn't fight like the Exarchoth did. They didn't rely on their technology. To win, they fought with everything they had, and everything they were. Their soldiers made split-second decisions that should have been impossible given their lack of advanced weaponry. Their military leaders thought outside the box and quickly adapted to any situation. Each new strategy was a fresh challenge to the Exarchoth, and for the first time in Jarek's long career, he was beginning to realize that this war wasn't going to be as easy as he had assumed. In the midst of the chaos, the humans launched their most audacious strike, yet they targeted one of the Exarchoth's central communication relays. A small group of fighters, led by a commander named Elena Davis, managed to infiltrate a heavily guarded facility on the outskirts of a major human stronghold. They planted explosives deep within the heart of the relay, cutting off that Exarchoth's ability to communicate with their fleet and causing widespread confusion among the alien ranks. Jarek could only watch in disbelief as his carefully laid plans unraveled before him. His command structure had been thrown into disarray, and he could feel the weight of the human resistance growing heavier by the second. The humans had taken the first step in turning the tide of the war, and Jarek had no idea how to stop them. The more he studied their tactics, the more he saw the true depth of their unpredictability. They didn't just throw themselves at the enemy in a blind fury. They calculated each move with precision. They adapted when faced with defeat and found ways to exploit even the smallest weaknesses in the Exarchoth's defenses. It was maddening, it was infuriating, and it was something Jarek had never experienced before. In the command room of the Exarchoth flagship, Jarek turned to his second-in-command, his voice low and strained. "They are unlike anything we've ever faced," he said. "This won't be over quickly." Jarek paced the command room, his mind racing as he processed the mounting evidence of humanity's resilience. Every strategy, every plan he had designed was being countered in ways that left him both impressed and disturbed. He had always believed that war was a simple equation of strength versus weakness, technology versus technology, but humanity defied that logic at every turn. The more Jarek watched the humans, the more he realized that they weren't merely fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And that instinct was terrifying. Unlike the Exarchoth, who followed a strict, hierarchical approach to combat, humans adapted in ways that were unpredictable and without pattern. It was like trying to fight against a storm that could change direction at any moment. His second-in-command, a tall alien named Kurov, leaned over a console, analyzing human transmissions intercepted in the wake of their successful strike. "They speak in riddles," Kurov muttered, frustration evident in his tone. "There is no discernible command structure, no central authority. How are they organizing these attacks?" Jarek's voice was a low growl as he responded, "That is precisely the problem. They don't need a central authority. Every human, from the lowest civilian to the highest general, is involved in this fight. They are unified not by orders but by something deeper, something that cannot be quantified. They fight not because they have to, but because they will not surrender." Kurov's eyes narrowed in confusion. "But they are primitive. Their weapons are crude compared to ours. How can this be?" Jarek's gaze was distant, as if he were speaking to himself rather than his subordinate. "It's not their weapons that concern me. It's their will. They will never stop fighting, Kurov. They will outlast us. They will fight us in ways we cannot predict, and we cannot defeat them through force alone. We will need more than firepower to crush this resistance." Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was beginning to truly rally. The first signs of a coordinated global response had taken root, and it wasn't long before the humans had established resistance cells in every corner of the planet. From the jungles of South America to the icy tundras of Siberia, humans were fighting back with more than just guns. They were using everything in their power to outthink the invaders. General Thomas Ainsley, a man who had seen his fair share of combat, found himself at the forefront of humanity's counteroffensive. His strategy was one of unorthodox thinking, using the environment, the terrain, and even human flaws as advantages. In a pivotal mission, Ainsley's forces infiltrated a Xarkoth research facility buried deep beneath the Earth's surface. The mission was dangerous, but it was the perfect example of human ingenuity at work. They used their knowledge of the land, their adaptability, and even their own resourcefulness to bypass the alien security systems and plant explosive charges. The result was devastating. The research facility exploded in a chain reaction that sent shockwaves throughout the alien fleet. Jarek watched as one of his key installations crumbled to the ground, knowing full well that this wasn't just a setback. It was a reflection of humanity's growing ability to not only fight back, but to think their way to victory. As the days passed, Jarek found himself grappling with a profound realization. The humans were not a species that could be crushed with sheer strength. They had something far more dangerous: creativity. They adapted faster than the Xarkoth could anticipate, outsmarting them in ways that were beyond calculation. Where the Xarkoth relied on advanced technology and cold, methodical strategy, humans fought with passion, with intuition, and with an unyielding belief in their own survival. Jarek stood in front of his war council, his mind weighed down by the impossible task ahead. "They are not just fighting to survive," he muttered. "They are fighting to win. And we may have underestimated them." As he spoke, his thoughts drifted back to a conversation he'd overheard during his time among the humans. A simple phrase echoed in his mind, one that he now understood all too well. "No matter what, we keep fighting." And in that moment, Jarek knew the true nature of humanity's strength. It wasn't their weapons, their technology, or even their numbers. It was their willpower, and that was something that Xarkoth had never encountered before. The more Jarek observed the humans, the more unsettling their tactics became. It wasn't just their ability to outmaneuver his forces. It was how they adapted to every situation, almost as if they were constantly learning from each encounter. No matter what he threw at them, they didn't seem to follow any kind of predictable pattern. They didn't operate like a conventional army. The Xarkoth relied on strict rules of engagement, precision, and overwhelming force, but the humans fought in a way that was almost chaotic. Jarek had spent years studying the patterns of species across the galaxy, cultures, tactics, minds, all of them following an expected rhythm. But these humans, they were unpredictable, and that was their greatest weapon. At the heart of humanity's rise, Jarek knew, was General Thomas Ainsley. The man's reputation had preceded him. He had been nothing special in terms of rank or resources, but it was his thinking that had caught the alien commander's attention. Ainsley didn't play by any known rules. He wasn't interested in facing the Xarkoth head-on. No, his strategies were based on diversion, misdirection, and sheer surprise. And they were working. Jarek watched as Ainsley's forces orchestrated another brilliant strike. This time, they targeted an apparently innocuous power station, one that, at first glance, seemed unimportant in the grand scheme of the invasion. Yet, once the station was destroyed, the entire region's communication grid collapsed. Ainsley had anticipated that the Xarkoth would rely on perfect coordination, their advanced tech needing constant communication to function properly. And just like that, the humans had torn it apart. What should have been a simple power outage turned into a crippling blow. "I don't understand," Jarek muttered to his council as he surveyed the damage, his mind racing. "How are they so unpredictable? How can they hit us where it hurts, and yet their strategy appears random?" Kruv, his second-in-command, looked up, his expression almost thoughtful. "Maybe it's not randomness. Maybe they're using what they have. They don't have the advanced tech or weapons we do, but their strength lies in their ability to adapt. It's almost like they're always one step ahead." Jarek's mind churned as he replayed the events. The humans never fought with the same approach twice. One moment, they were using outdated firearms and guerrilla tactics. The next, they were exploiting alien technology in ways that even the Exarchov hadn't considered. The humans didn't just survive the initial onslaught. They were learning faster than the Exarchov could destroy them. And Jarek could see it. The humans were turning every loss, every battle, into an opportunity. The unpredictability wasn't random at all. It was a deliberate strategy. Jarek knew that if he didn't find a way to contain the humans soon, the consequences would be disastrous. As he prepared to move his forces, he remembered something Ainsley had said during a transmission he intercepted. "We're not going to beat you with your own weapons. We're going to beat you with something you'll never understand. Our ability to adapt, to think, and to never stop fighting." The words rang in Jarek's mind, gnawing at him. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology, their numbers, or even their will to survive. It was their minds, their capacity to change, to learn, and to evolve in the face of adversity. It was something no other species in the galaxy had ever demonstrated on such a scale. And that was what scared him the most. With that realization, Jarek gave the order to regroup his forces, but something in his heart told him this was no longer just about defeating an enemy. It was about understanding it. Understanding the nature of this unyielding species that refused to follow any rules except their own. The fight was no longer about just winning. It was about survival. And for the first time, Jarek wasn't sure who would come out on top. Jarek stood silently in the command center of his flagship, staring at the holographic display before him. The numbers had been clear at first. His forces were superior in every measurable way. Technology, firepower, speed, they had crushed lesser species with ease, and humanity had initially seemed no different. But now, weeks into the conflict, the data was becoming more unsettling. Human resistance was no longer a mere nuisance. It had grown into something far more formidable. The humans had taken to using their environment, their ingenuity, and even their weaknesses against the Exarchov. Jarek had never encountered a species so adaptable. A seemingly small group of civilians armed with nothing more than improvised weapons had disrupted supply lines that should have been invulnerable. A coordinated strike on a military base resulted in the destruction of a vital command center, sending shockwaves through his forces. Every failure was met with an immediate and increasingly effective counteraction. "Commander," Kurov spoke hesitantly, breaking Jarek's thoughts. "The resistance, it's growing more organized. They're not just reacting anymore. They're planning, and they're doing it faster than we can track." Jarek clenched his fists. It was true. Every time they managed to wipe out one resistance cell, another appeared, more prepared, more determined. The humans were not just surviving. They were learning, evolving, and adapting faster than any other species Jarek had ever encountered. Even the best-trained Exarchov forces struggled to anticipate their next move. The turning point came when Jarek's forces launched a massive assault on the heart of the human capital in Europe. They had anticipated minimal resistance, but instead found themselves in the midst of a brilliant trap. The humans had set up false signals, tricking the Exarchov into deploying troops into a sector that was nothing but empty ruins. As the fleet moved in to secure their victory, the humans launched their counterattack. A series of underground tunnels, previously hidden from the aliens, erupted in coordinated blasts, crippling the Exarchov's fleet. The explosions rang out like thunder, each one weakening Jarek's grip on the region. His forces were caught in a two-pronged attack, one from above and one from below. Human forces, operating with incredible precision and coordination, now moved in ways that were utterly foreign to the methods that Exarchov were accustomed to. Jarek stared at the live feed of the battle. On one side, his troops were desperately trying to regroup, but the humans had cut off their escape routes. On the other, resistance fighters were tearing through the city, their strategy as erratic as it was effective. They weren't fighting to hold territory. They were making sure his forces never had the chance to regroup. "Why aren't they retreating?" Jarek muttered under his breath, a question that seemed to echo in his mind. He had watched countless species fight before, and all of them had retreated at some point when they saw defeat on the horizon. But the humans? They didn't retreat. They adapted. They fought harder. And they learned from every failure, using it to become even more dangerous. Kruv, still scanning the chaos, spoke again, his voice tinged with disbelief. They're not like any enemy we faced before. They're relentless. Jarek slammed his fist against the console. Enough. We will not lose to these creatures. His order was clear. Regroup the forces, shift the strategy. But even as he spoke, a sense of dread began to settle over him. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. What had begun as a simple mission to conquer a primitive world was now spiraling into a desperate struggle for survival. Deep down, Jarek knew that this war was no longer about overwhelming force. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something deeper. And that understanding brought with it a realization that chilled him to the bone. The war had changed, and the humans had already won the most important battle. They had forced him to acknowledge their true strength. As the hologram flickered and shifted, showing more and more signs of human ingenuity on the battlefield, Jarek felt a gnawing fear he had never felt before. The humans' greatest weapon was no longer their weapons. It was their mind. And that was something that Exarchoth couldn't defeat with technology or firepower. It was something far more dangerous, something they had never anticipated. And that was what terrified him. The war had changed. Jarek could feel it in the air. His fleet had been struck hard, and despite his attempts to regroup and tighten control, the humans were one step ahead. They were no longer just trying to defend their world. They were actively dismantling his invasion, piece by piece, with a relentless precision that left him scrambling for answers. In the aftermath of the failed assault on the European capital, the humans had managed to not only evade annihilation, but had launched a series of counteroffensives that completely blindsided the Exarchoth. Jarek had watched in disbelief as small, seemingly insignificant human cells took out key installations with surgical strikes. A power station here, a communications relay there. Every blow was a setback, and every setback seemed to push the Exarchoth closer to the edge. Jarek was no stranger to defeat. He had seen his forces lose battles before. But this felt different. The humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to make sure they never lost. And that tenacity, that relentless drive, had started to gnaw at Jarek's once unshakable confidence. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp alarm. One of his ships, the Zoreth, had come under attack. A fleet of human fighters, faster and more nimble than anything that Exarchoth had anticipated, had broken through the outer perimeter of the fleet. Jarek's heart raced. These fighters were not armed with advanced alien weaponry. They were simple, repurposed machines, old models of human technology that had been retrofitted with whatever they could scrounge. Yet somehow, they were able to punch through layers of defense that should have been impenetrable. Jarek watched the live feed, his hands clenched tightly around the armrests of his command chair, as the human forces took advantage of every tiny vulnerability. "Commander, we're losing control of the Zoreth," Kruv reported, his voice tight with alarm. "Their tactics are..." He hesitated. "Unpredictable. It's like they've studied every weakness in our fleet and adapted accordingly." Jarek stood up abruptly, his mind whirling. He had long known that the humans were unpredictable. But this was something else. These were no longer primitive warriors throwing themselves at his forces with blind fury. The humans were studying his weaknesses, exploiting them with a kind of expertise he had never expected. The battle for the Zoreth continued to unfold on the holographic display. The human ships weren't just attacking. They were performing what appeared to be synchronized maneuvers, positioning themselves in ways that seemed impossibly coordinated, as though every fighter was in perfect communication. But there was no centralized command, no overwhelming technological advantage. The humans were doing something far more dangerous. They were learning to read the battlefield, anticipating moves before they even happened. Their unpredictability had become their greatest asset. Jarek's mind raced. The humans weren't just playing a game of survival anymore. They were playing to win. On Earth, the resistance had begun to grow in scale. The attack on the Zoreth was only the beginning of a new wave of coordinated strikes across the globe. The humans, armed with their newfound knowledge of alien technology, had begun hijacking Kharkoth weapons and using them against their creators. Jarek's heart sank as he watched one such strike unfold. A human team infiltrated one of his heavily fortified defense stations, planted explosives, and took control of several advanced alien turrets. The Kharkoth could no longer trust their own technology. The more Jarek saw, the more he realized that the humans weren't just exploiting his weaknesses, they were forcing him to fight a war he couldn't win. They were outmaneuvering him, exploiting every opening, every miscalculation. They had learned from every failure, and now they were applying that knowledge in ways that were simply beyond the reach of his fleet's calculations. "They've already won," Jarek muttered under his breath. Kurov turned to him, eyes wide. "What do you mean, Commander?" Jarek stared at the battlefield on the display, his voice heavy with realization. "It's not just that they're winning battles. They're changing the rules of the war. They are forcing us to rethink everything we know about combat." The humans had become more than just a resistance. They had become an unpredictable force, one that Jarek could no longer control. And that, in itself, was humanity's most dangerous weapon of all. As he watched the battle unfold, a cold certainty gripped him. The war wasn't over. But now, Jarek had to admit something he had never imagined he would. The true battle had only just begun, and humanity, against all odds, was playing for keeps. The human resistance had evolved from a mere nuisance to an unstoppable force. Jarek had underestimated them, and now his fleet was paying the price. With each passing day, the humans adapted faster than the Kharkoth could recalibrate. Their ingenuity was something beyond his comprehension, and it was slowly, steadily, breaking down the once indomitable Kharkoth war machine. Jarek leaned over the console, his eyes scanning the latest data feed. The humans were making progress on every front. In the east, a network of resistance fighters had successfully liberated a major industrial city and reactivated its weapons manufacturing plants, pumping out resources at an accelerated rate. On the west coast of North America, an alliance of military and civilian groups had launched a surprise attack on one of the Kharkoth's major fuel depots, wiping it off the map and crippling vital supply lines. In the meantime, the global intelligence network the humans had established was operating like a well-oiled machine. Every piece of captured Kharkoth technology had been reverse-engineered, and human scientists were learning to use the very weapons meant to crush them. Jarek was watching it all unfold in real time, helpless to stop the flood of resistance sweeping through every corner of the globe. "Commander, we've intercepted human communications," Kurov said, his voice tinged with concern. "They're organizing something massive. This isn't just another small-scale assault. This is bigger." Jarek's brow furrowed. The humans had been skilled in small, precise strikes, but this felt different. His mind churned as he ran the numbers in his head. For the first time, it wasn't a matter of outsmarting them with brute force. It was a matter of outlasting them. But could his forces truly endure this level of constant pressure? Could they adapt to a strategy they didn't understand? Jarek wasn't sure anymore. "Their confidence is growing," Jarek muttered. "They've learned from their defeats, adapted faster than we could ever have anticipated." Kurov hesitated before speaking again. "Commander, I think we have to consider the possibility that we might lose this war." The word stung Jarek like a slap to the face. Loss was a concept foreign to him. He had never once considered the possibility of failure. But now, with every report and every new tactic the humans employed, the idea of defeat was beginning to creep into his thoughts. For the first time, He could no longer trust his calculations. "Are you suggesting we retreat?" Jarek's voice was low, almost a growl. The thought of retreating, of surrendering to the humans, was something he couldn't fathom. "No, not retreat," Kurov said quickly. "But we must recognize the gravity of the situation. Their will is unbreakable. We cannot keep them suppressed indefinitely." Jarek's gaze hardened as he turned back to the holographic display. The humans were beginning to unite their forces on a scale he hadn't thought possible. It was a mix of military, civilians, scientists, engineers, and even children. Everyone was involved in the fight. Each person contributed to the effort, using whatever tools they had at their disposal. The humans weren't fighting just for territory or resources. They were fighting for something far more dangerous. They were fighting for their future. Jarek couldn't help but feel the weight of that realization. The Exarchov had invaded countless worlds in their time, and each time, their dominance had been absolute. Yet here, on this planet, against this species, he could sense the balance of power tipping away from his grasp. His mind raced as he considered their options. There was no more time for careful planning, no time for drawn-out conflict. The humans were too quick, too creative. A single decisive blow was needed, but that blow had to be different. It couldn't be a simple show of force. Jarek's eyes shifted toward Kurov. "Prepare for a new strategy," he said, his voice dark with intent. "We can't match their creativity, but we can exploit their desperation. If we push them far enough into a corner, we may yet break them." Kurov raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we force them into a final, crushing confrontation?" Jarek's lips curled into a cold smile. "Exactly. We'll push them to the brink and make them think they're winning. And then, we'll strike when they least expect it." As the strategy began to form in his mind, Jarek realized the truth. Humanity's greatest strength was its ability to fight back in the face of insurmountable odds. But what if they could be made to believe they had won, only to fall into the ultimate trap? The stage was set. The final act was about to begin, and Jarek was determined to make it their last. The final battle was fast approaching. Jarek's plan had been set into motion. His forces, though battered and spread thin, were now gathering at key points, ready to strike at the heart of humanity's resistance. The humans, growing overconfident in their recent successes, had begun to believe they were on the verge of victory. Jarek knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when their confidence would be their downfall. From his command center, Jarek watched as the human forces mobilized, their movements bold and sure. It seemed that they believed they had already won. The war had dragged on long enough for the humans to grow certain that they had bested the Exarchov at every turn. And that, Jarek thought with a grim smile, was exactly what he needed. The human arrogance would lead them straight into his trap. Kurov entered the room, his face taut with urgency. "Commander, we've intercepted a message. The humans are preparing for their final assault. They're moving toward our stronghold in the north." Jarek turned toward Kurov, his eyes narrowed. So they've decided to make their move. The humans had taken the bait. They had concentrated their forces into one final, concentrated push. They believed that taking that Kharkov stronghold would end the war, that this would be the decisive blow that would force Jarek to retreat. What they didn't know was that Jarek had already set the stage for their ultimate defeat. "Prepare the fleet for a counterattack," Jarek ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "We will give them what they want, but once they're in position, we will strike from every direction. They won't know where the blows are coming from. We will break them." Kurov hesitated for a moment, concern flashing across his face. "Are you sure about this, Commander?" "The humans, they fight with a fury we've never seen before. They'll be difficult to contain, even with a surprise attack." Jarek's lips curled into a smirk. "Their fury is their greatest weakness. They cannot stop fighting, and that will lead them to their downfall. They have no patience. They won't see the trap until it's too late." The Exarchov fleet moved into position, surrounding the area the humans had targeted for their final assault. Jarek's ships were positioned just beyond the range of the humans' most advanced weaponry, hidden in the shadows of the planet's moons. They'd waited, poised to strike. It didn't take long before the human forces appeared, their ships advancing in tight formation, eager to press forward and finish what they had started. Jarek watched from his command center, eyes gleaming with anticipation. The time had come. As the humans drew closer to the stronghold, Jarek gave the order to attack. Hexarchoth warships, once thought to be out of sight, appeared from the shadows. They opened fire with precision, targeting the human fleet's weak points. But that wasn't the true trap. Just as the human ships attempted to regroup, another wave of Hexarchoth forces emerged from a different direction, flanking the humans from behind. The humans' response was immediate but panicked. They hadn't anticipated this kind of coordinated assault. Their ships scattered, attempting to dodge the attacks, but Jarek knew they were too late. Then, something strange happened. Instead of crumbling under the pressure, the humans began to adapt, moving in unpredictable patterns, dodging and weaving with a kind of chaotic brilliance. Their commanders shouted orders, and their ships executed maneuvers Jarek hadn't thought possible. But he had planned for this. Jarek's smile faded slightly as he realized something. They were fighting back. But this time, they were not the only ones adapting. In that moment, Jarek saw the humans for what they truly were, the most dangerous species he had ever faced. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting with everything they had left, and they had learned from every defeat. Every miscalculation made by the Hexarchoth was countered with devastating precision. The final battle had begun, but Jarek understood one thing now. This was not the decisive moment he had envisioned. No matter how many blows the Hexarchoth struck, no matter how many times the humans seemed on the brink of defeat, they kept fighting. Jarek's grip tightened on his armrest. The war was far from over. And for the first time, he wasn't sure who would win. The humans had taught him one crucial truth: never underestimate the will to survive.